Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily Reese, featuring a conversation with composer Brent Meyer. Brent is going to talk about the game Katoa, which is a mobile game, a free-to-play that, yes, has microtransactions, but a portion of the money that you spend on the game goes directly toward one of 4 charities that help the climate, or try to anyway, and you get to choose which one of those charities you would like. So at the time of recording, I just checked their website, and the Katoa website indicates that players have just recently unlocked a $50,000 donation to earthday.org. So that's one of the 4 charities that they help through these microtransactions. So that seems pretty significant. So it's kind of like Animal Crossing underwater is how Brent describes it. So you manage this ecosystem and you have an avatar and you just do good, and you have these little rhythmic battles, which is really fun. The little combat scenes, so to speak, are rhythmic in nature. So that's pretty fun. And it's fun to talk about all those things with Brent. Also, Brent is from around here being Minnesota. And in particular, we kind of nerd out about the Twin Cities Metro, which is where I live and where he lived at one point, and now he lives in an outer community to the metro. So we talk a little bit about that as well. So we get a little nerdy about Minnesota, which is always fun because I really like it here, even though I hate the weather. Join us on Discord. That link is down in the show notes. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel, get notifications. These kinds of things help us out a lot. So we'd be so grateful for your support in that way. And if you can help us out financially, check us out over on Patreon. That is patreon.com/level. All right, here is Brent Meyer talking about Katoa.
My name is Brent Meyer. I am the composer and kind of part-time user experience, gameplay experience person on Katoa. It's a game that has been in the works for about 3 years, done by a group of folks that are really keen on using games for change. And I know that there's a bunch of different initiatives, Games for Good, Games for Change. The major premise of Katoa is that you get to have this little underwater space. I always call it like underwater Animal Crossing, but with a purpose. You have this haven that you create and then you do these missions to attract fauna to your haven, and you plant all kinds of different flora in your haven, and you keep raising the level. But the cool concept is that it's a free-to-play game, so there are microtransactions involved, but any of the money that you put into it gets directed towards a handful of different charities that are a part of the game and supporting it. So Earth Day Alliance and the Southern Ocean Alliance, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. So there's a lot of any of the money that's coming in, a good chunk of that is going back out to those spaces.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And I mean, yeah, I love underwater anything. And I just, the sound is great. The music is perfect for the vibe of the underwaterness. How did you end up getting connected to it?
So the person that got pulled in to direct the game is a really good friend of mine. His name is Christian Rossi. I've known him for well over a decade at this point. He's one of those people that I met that I just randomly met at a thing. Yeah. And the thing that we met at didn't go anywhere, but he and I became really, really good friends, like almost immediately. And so we've worked on a handful of interactive experiences over the course of our friendship. And when the opportunity came up for him to get back into games, he was one of the co-founders of Treyarch. So a long, long time ago, he worked in Call of Duty space and did all of the fun stuff there. And took a break from gaming, got pulled back in, and knew that I had always wanted to get in and had been working on music and had done music in the interactive space for a long, long time, but never for an actual game. He said, if you want to take a shot at this, I'm not guaranteeing that you are the person that's going to get the job. We've got a bunch of other people we have to convince, but let's take a swing at it and see what happens. And they were very patient with me and very welcoming and very inviting and gave me the shot. And we eventually got to where we got with what's there.
Yeah. Amazing. So, right before we hit record, you mentioned that a lot of this happened over the course of lockdown and the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we kicked off production. I got my first piece of concept art on the game. I want to say it was in I went back and looked at the files not too long ago, like May or June of 2020.
Okay.
So I was holed up. I used to live in South Minneapolis, so I was holed up in my home studio in Minneapolis, just looking at character art. That's all I had to go on. We really didn't even
Okay.
have
Yeah.
kind of the brief of what the demo was going to entail or anything like that. It was character art, and we started just throwing together concepts, and it took a while to really figure out exactly what style we wanted to be in. It's funny that you mentioned, like, I love being underwater and the soundtrack feels just perfect for being in that space. It went in a lot of different directions before we landed on this real classical kind of orchestral
Yeah.
hybrid approach, I would say.
Yep.
Uh, Early on, a lot of it was like literally like, how can I make an instrument sound like a bubble? Or how can I make this instrument sound like a wave? And it was kind of this weird kind of, I wouldn't say like full blown electronic score, but we were kind of veering off into that direction. But the biggest issue the whole time is that when you look at those characters and that concept art, it's got like a real high quality, almost Pixar-esque kind of vibe to it.
Okay.
And it just didn't feel
Yeah.
like the electronic direction that we were going
Sure.
matched kind of that real magical feeling you were getting when you were looking at those characters. And then there was a moment, spoiler alert for anybody who cares about that kind of stuff, but there's a moment early on at the end of the first time user experience where you're greeted with a whale, the mother of the ocean. And when she comes in, like that moment, the first time we saw that kind of happen in game, that's when we knew, okay, we've got to shift entirely. Let's go this direction. Let's get really majestic and fanciful. We had a lot of references to the movie Ponyo was referenced a lot.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
Studio Ghibli film. And so trying to figure out, because that's definitely not my background as a musician. I am not a classically trained person.
Okay,
So
yeah.
it was really like, okay, well, if we're going that way, I've got a lot of stuff to learn in a short period of time. And we just kind of started moving. And so we played with soundscapes and we played with different genres until we got to that space, probably for about a year and a half of
wow.
just discovery, which was
Yeah.
awesome. Frustrating at times, but really, I mean, that's where the fun is, in my opinion, is like, what is the right sound for this? Because you don't always nail it right out of the gate. So
Yeah,
cool.
for sure. I mean, there
Yeah.
are so many directions you can go. We know this just from some of the most iconic soundtracks that evoke space, right? Whether it's Star
Right.
Wars or Blade Runner or something like that.
Yep.
Those extremes can serve the purpose. So because you have that many choices, it can be tricky to find the vibe, but I love it. It has that wonderment, and it matches the art, right? Like you said, it's very like your avatar is like this kind of not mermaidy kind, but just underwater weird. Not weird isn't really fair to say, but
No,
unusual.
I get where you're going.
Yeah.
We call the avatar the being of light, which is what the kind of the main theme is titled Beings of Light. And it just kind of, it's a motif that gets introduced right away on that title screen when you first launch the game. But then we carry that really simple kind of melody that plays throughout the entire game. And it's present in all of the biomes that are available at launch. There's 2 of them. And we hearken back to that just about for every single thing that happens in that game, which is also really, really fun. And that's where, I was talking about how awesome of a human being Steve Pardo is. He really was like, what key do we want to do this in? And how can we get all of this matching up so that no matter when you pull that in, everything just works? And it was just like this mind-blowing experience of working with him on all of that stuff. So
yeah. Steve Pardo, just as an aside, is a composer who lives in Nashville and owns or co-owns, I'm not sure, but Skew Sound, right?
Skew Sound, yep.
And Skew Sound did the sound for this game.
They did all the sound design.
All the sound. And Steve reached out and was like, you should know to me. And he's like, you should know Brent. And so that's how we ended up having this conversation. So Steve's name might come up a time or two. We both have this amazing adoration of Steve Pardo. Such a wonderful person.
Awesome guy. Just an awesome guy.
Anyway, I didn't mean to, but go continue.
No, I mean that back to your point, like you could go in so many different directions, and it really did come down to what fits those character designs, what fits, all the word that just kept coming up over and over and over again was magical. I think that there's a lot of mystery that exists underwater that we still don't know about. You used the great analogy of space. Those are two really unknown spaces that just seem so huge and so large and unexplored that it just you could literally go anywhere, but it just felt right to keep coming back to that word of magical and trying to elicit that feeling that you get when I've mentioned Ponyo before. I'll say it again. The Ponyo soundtrack was really a big influence on what we wanted to do.
And that's Joe Hisaishi, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, who does all of the Studio Ghibli stuff. And it's just, I'm not even remotely suggesting that I'm anywhere near that sphere of talent, but that is definitely what we looked at in terms of, wow, we really like how these sounds fit this space. And you wouldn't immediately go, oh, you know what? Full-blown orchestra underwater makes a ton of sense. It actually isn't the first thing that you think of.
You do some really cool stuff, though, with some of those instruments, like Gaia is the track where it's like almost kind of whale songy, right? You do all these portamentos in the strings and stuff. Talk about Gaia.
So it's interesting that the Gaia sequence is by far my favorite sequence in the entire game, and it also went through a few permutations in terms of what her music sounded like. I think the original version of her arrival was a waltz. And the reason we didn't use that is somebody who worked on the team was like, if there's anything that's never going to be in this game, it's a waltz, because I can't stand a waltz. And so we went back to the drawing board, because we originally wanted this grand fanfare. She is the climax of that prologue that you're playing through. And we wanted stuff to just build and build and build. And you'll kind of notice as you're playing through that stuff does kind of layer as you progress through that first time user experience. The world starts in one state and slowly transitions to another. And when she shows up, you wanted it to be this like, ta-da, grand announcement that you've finally met the person that you're here to meet. And now you're going to get your missive for, what your job is for the rest of the game. And then just one, back to mentioning Steve, who will come up a ton, we were very collaborative when it came to like how the sounds the interplay between the sounds and the music. And we were both just kind of like, you know what, this just it's not working, but we couldn't quite figure out what wasn't working. And I was messing around with a sample library that I had, and I started like sliding stuff, and the sample library is designed to allow you to play any number of notes, and the transitions will kind of fill themselves in. Slapped a ton of reverb and other effects on there, and it was just like, oh, it's that simple. Like it should be. It went from this notion that fanfare was the thing that should carry it to gravitas being the word that sat underneath it. You really wanted this, because when you play the game and you see her, she takes up the entirety of the screen, which is also awesome. Like it really, the way the developers were able to capture the scale of her on the small device that you're looking at, to me was another wow, that is amazing. And just trying to come up with something that had more weight, and not seriousness might be a little bit too far, but I mean, we are playing a game about saving the ocean because we as human beings are ruining it. So you wanted to kind of have, some sort of element of like, there's a moment of seriousness that needs to be in there, but not too serious that you're too depressed to keep playing the game. But she carries some weight, and she is visually, in my opinion, it's a stunning sequence in the game. And so it just was like, let's let people focus on that rather than overwhelming them with music, but which I think is what a good score is supposed to do. You shouldn't yeah, you should notice it, but it shouldn't be the thing.
Yeah, like a supportive situation,
Yeah.
depending on the circumstance, I suppose. But yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk just again briefly about the main theme itself.
Yeah.
Is that what? So that was then what you came up with first to establish kind of the palette over the long haul?
Yeah, after we spent, a good 8 to 12 months exploring all these different directions, and like I think the very first piece of music we wrote for Katoa, it was at that time called Something Different, and it was like just a trailer that they had pieced together with concept art and some early environmental work that had been done, and that landed like a lead balloon. It was so flat. Like people who saw that trailer were like, I don't get this at all. It doesn't make any sense. The music, what is this? And so we kind of went back to the drawing board, and I just sat down at a piano and started messing around. And I think it's in G major. The motif came first. And then the rest of it was just like, well, how can we just keep adding more fanfare elements around it? Like, how can we fill this in? Just these little things that pop off here and there. And that turned into the main theme. And we tried to keep it. There was always this idea that at some point, should the game become successful, we could actually record a live orchestra doing that piece. And so I tried to be very mindful of how big to make it from an arrangement / orchestration standpoint. So there's actually there's not a lot of instruments in there. It sounds big because I think we're doing a really good job of passing stuff back and forth, and just having these little ornamental things that happen every time the motif gets played, and then passing the motif back and forth. But that, to answer your original question, yeah, that main theme then became kind of the benchmark for the rest of the game, and everything is literally built off of that main theme that plays when you first fire up the game.
Well, let's nerd out about our shared geography for a moment before we get back into the music, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because when Steve reached out, he said that it was that he was like, I think he lives near you. And I just always think of Chicago when someone says that. I'm like, oh, they probably live in Chicago, And then when you're like, I'm in Stillwater, that's just so close.
Yep.
It's like
literally your backyard.
Literally a suburb of the Twin Cities metro. Just
I call it
scenic
the
part
village.
Of it.
I call it the village.
But then you mentioned at the top of the interview that you used to live in South Minneapolis, which is where I live.
Okay. Yeah.
And I love South Minneapolis, and I can say my neighborhood because it's so large. I live in Powderhorn.
Okay.
And so whereabouts did you live, if you don't?
We were in Nokomis. We were in Nokomis.
Oh, Nokomis.
So
over
by the big lake, we were in the pocket in between Lake Nokomis and Minnehaha Falls.
Oh, nice.
So we were there for a long time.
I love
we were
it
there
for
over a decade. My wife and I lived in that part of town for over a decade, and then separately, prior to us meeting, we each spent time in pockets of South and Uptown and Northeast. And about the thing that brought us to Stillwater is about 5 or 6 years ago, I started threatening my wife, saying, I'm done with people. I am ready to go off grid. And I had literally started looking at plots of land in Montana. I was ready to move to Montana, to the middle of the mountains, build my A-frame cabin, move all of my studio gear out there, and just be like, I'm going to look at trees and rocks and write music all day. And she said, how about Stillwater instead? And so
it's about as Montana as you can get in the Twin Cities. It's about as
Montana as you can get. But the truth is I was about to hop on a plane and go to Montana to look at stuff, and then the pandemic hit.
Okay.
And then really, really dear friends of ours, my wife has known her friend Lizzie since kindergarten. Wow. They had been living out in LA for about 6 years, decided to move back. So they moved back right after, right in the beginning of the March of 2020, they moved back to town. We started coming out here to visit. And I said, okay, this is this is pretty nice.
Yeah.
Let's start looking at stuff. And what started as a cool idea and a joke turned into, oh my gosh, we've looked at 70 houses, and now we found one. And we found
Wow.
one. We lucked out on timing,
Yeah.
and we got this amazing space right up right up right up the hill from downtown Stillwater. So
Oh, it's such a beautiful area. Just, I'm sure most people listening don't know it well, but it's right on the border between
yep.
Minnesota and Wisconsin, and the St. Croix River is what is that border is, and it's just a beautiful. I was the 4th of July down there is a beautiful time of year. It's
Yeah.
really fun. They shoot fireworks over the river, and yeah, it's just we're really blessed in this part of the world, really, to just be surrounded by water. There's just water everywhere, and I love everything about it. I love being over. I used to live in Longfellow over by the Mississippi
Oh,
River,
sure. Yeah. Yep.
which, obviously right there by Minnehaha Falls, where you
Mhm.
guys kind of used to live. And that's a totally different experience than the lake experience the river is, right? And
It
I just love
really
it. I love
is.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The river, that was something I wasn't anticipating. Like I've been, to your point, I'm fortunate enough living in Minneapolis to at least be close to a lake
Yeah.
in general proximity, and a river town is a very different
Yeah.
experience. It's equally as awesome. But there are key distinctions between a river town and a lake town. That is for sure. That is for
River
sure.
towns are biker towns too, especially in this part. Like that's like
It
a huge
really is.
biker
It's
town.
kind of wild. I mean,
Yeah.
Stillwater, I had come out here a handful of times while living in Minneapolis, but
Yeah.
it wasn't until I got out here that I was like, wow, this place is just like so diverse
Yeah.
across every definition of the word too. We're going to have an Art in the Park festival that's
Yeah.
right next to one of the biggest biker bars on the river, where I'm looking at a piece of fine art and some pottery that someone made, and now 15 Harleys are driving by
Yeah.
to pull up into a bar to have a couple beers before they keep going on their lovely scenic drive up north Highway 95. It's just kind of it's a wild place, but it's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So tell me about your musical history then, Brent.
Yeah.
It seems like you've been a freelance composer. That seems like that's your gig.
Freelance composing is a relatively new gig. My relationship with music, it's funny. I was thinking about this morning. I've got a daughter who's about to turn 15, and there's a lot she doesn't know about her dad's musical past. And so I've started to like play old records. Hey, did you know I made this? And did you know I made this? And did you know I made this? And she's like, well, you know what, Dad? That's not bad. I
Nice.
grew up in a very small town, and so when someone said you're going to have a career in music, or if you said you wanted to have a career in music, it was like, well, I'm either going to become a famous rock star, or I'm going to go play in a concert band somewhere. Like those were the paths, right?
Yeah.
So I took the rock star approach. I tried to take the rock star approach. When I moved to Minneapolis after college, I was in a band called the Lindales for a number of years. And then after that disbanded, I was in an electronic project for a number of years called Machines in Transit. And both were great experiences. The Lindales were moderately successful. Machines in Transit was critically successful, but none of it was like enough to kind of propel you to that next stage. And
Yeah.
my relationship with music at that point was kind of like, well, now what do I do? And I work in the interactive space. I've worked in the interactive space for 20 years, and I've designed games in that space. I did a bunch of work for Virgin Records in the early 2000s, and every game that we made, when Flash experiences were a cool thing.
Yes.
Um, I would do all the sound design and music for those, and we would put those out, and that was fun. But I never really made kind of the connection of, oh, I could be composing as a path to take. And so I'm kind of a late arrival in the scene, but
Interesting.
I was doing a bunch of work overseas. I worked with the soccer team, Manchester United, the soccer team. I did a bunch of interactive
cool.
work for them.
Oh, fun.
And all of the travel back and forth really just burnt me out. And so
Mm-hmm.
I resigned from that position, and I went on a self-imposed short sabbatical. And during that kind of 3 month process of like, I need to find another job, but while trying to find another job was like really reignited my interest and love of music. Like I kind of
Mm-hmm.
came back home to it. And so
Mm-hmm.
really just jumped in head first into the deep end of the pool, being like, well, what if I did this? And how do you do this? And how are people scoring things? Because I'd written music for small independent films and stuff in the past, but never anything at scale. And I really wanted to understand the scale of it and dig
Mm.
into the details. And so I spent about a good 6 years just studying.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and then the Katoa opportunity came up, and I was like, well, now it's time to see if I was actually paying attention for those 6 years, or if I was just killing time.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's how I got here. That's how I got here.
How did the study change the type of music you were listening to? I assume it did. I don't know, but I
It,
assume it
it,
did.
oh, it absolutely did. I
Yeah.
mean, I've always liked a ton of different stuff,
Yeah.
but what I didn't have as big of an appreciation of before that I do now is more classically oriented music. Here's a great example. I I've always noticed music in that context. I think we've all got like movies that were, oh, the score for that, the soundtrack for that is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I played Skyrim for the first time and I heard that music, and you
Yeah.
can still hear that music. You don't even have to be looking at anything. You fire up any of those tracks from Skyrim and you're immediately transported to that space. I was like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
That's what I want to figure out how to do. Because in the past, I had always approached music from a very pop oriented standpoint, whether it's pop rock or pop electronica. It was like, hey, we're doing a verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and we're done. You got 3 minutes and 30 seconds to do it, and then we're moving on to the next thing. And if it gets played on the radio, awesome.
Yep.
Somebody buys an MP3, even better. It wasn't until that time where I was like, man, that leaving that Manchester United job, jumping in and just kind of unearthing a lot of the gear that I had kind of tucked away from the electronic days and saying, well, how can I use this stuff
Mm-hmm.
to get into that space, which is when I discovered sample libraries and all of that fun stuff, and really figuring out how to use those things. And then, when you're the only way that you're going to use those things successfully is if you understand how those instruments actually work. So reading classic Walter Piston books that say, hey, this is how you orchestrate stuff and this is how you
Yep.
arrange stuff, and just really immersing yourself into that and trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand that side of it. And the funny thing is, at least from my perspective, once you do have a solid understanding of what's going on there, it's not actually that much different than your verse, chorus, bridge, chorus
Right.
situation. So, so
It's very
yeah,
true.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it did, yeah. It changed a lot of what I really listened to and what I got
Mm-hmm.
into, and
Mm-hmm.
it was, I can't remember. Do you ever watch Rick Beato's YouTube channel? The guy that
Uh-uh.
like he's this old dude, former record producer that digs into just different musical trends
Oh,
and all of
cool.
that. And he had this episode about why you stop. I think that the title of it was "Why You Stop Listening to Music That You Love," or "Why You Stop Listening to Artists That You Love." And
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten to that space. I got into a spot where like all of the stuff that I listened to when I was a kid and through college, I kind of stopped listening to and always wanted to be digesting new stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But going back home to the stuff that you love, I think when you're in those formative years also kind of unlocks this like freedom of creativity. You don't feel that kind of, not to get too deep and philosophical about it, but you don't feel the weight of the world if you're not listening to current state, current
Yeah.
world music. If you can go back to music that's associated with something that reminds you of a lighter
Mm-hmm.
space in your life, I feel like it gets those wheels turning in a way that are
Yeah.
conducive to being creative.
So I can see the PS5 in the background.
Yes. Yeah. We are a gaming household. We've got
Tell me more. Yeah.
we I mean lucky enough to have a wife who is also just a huge gaming nerd. So
Yeah.
we've got
Yeah.
this is actually I'm in my garage right now.
Oh, no shit. That's amazing. I
Yeah.
love that.
So
Okay.
this is where the PlayStation lives. The Xbox is inside. We're all in every waking moment now, furiously playing through Tears of the Kingdom,
Yes. Yes.
trying not to spoil it for each other. But did you see this? No, I didn't see that. Please don't tell me about that.
Yeah. Don't say more.
Um, yeah, that's about it. It's
Yep.
basically, hey, that's pretty awesome, isn't it? It's head nods
Hmm.
across the room saying, yes, this game is great. But yeah, we are gaming nerds through and through and through.
I love that. And that's been a lifelong thing for you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can go all the way back to when I was a little kid. My dad bought an Intellivision. If anybody listening remembers what
Wow.
the heck that is,
Amazing.
that's where I started on the
Wow.
Intellivision.
Okay. So
And
yeah,
then was
lifer.
was made fun of because I was playing in a Intellivision while everybody else was playing Nintendo. And
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
parents finally gave in and got a Nintendo for us. I think
Nice.
when I was in the eighth grade.
Okay.
And I've
Yeah.
been hooked, addicted, whatever you want to call it, ever
Yeah.
since. Yeah.
Now I know a lot of people who live here and have always lived here who don't have the Minnesota accent. Most people do. You do not. So where did you grow
Mm.
up?
I grew up in Lanesboro, Minnesota. I've
You
lived in
did.
Minnesota.
It's another beautiful community. Oh my
Mhm.
God.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
another
on.
village, as it were, a much
Yeah.
smaller village than Stillwater. I don't have a
Yeah.
Minnesota accent
No.
because um, I went to college for theater, and as a trained actor, the very first
Ah.
thing that they did for me was you got to get rid of that.
Yeah.
And so I did. I got rid of it.
But you can do it
And
if you want, I bet.
yeah, I can. I can. I won't.
Right.
But
No need.
but yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I do
Okay.
not have one. But yeah, I've
Okay.
lived here the majority of my life. I went to school out of state
Okay.
in
We're
Wisconsin.
Oh,
Um,
you naughty. That's awful. Terrible.
um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's good.
yeah,
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
yeah.
Well,
Lanesboro, another small village with bike trails.
yeah, and I know people who cabin there. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind
Hmm.
of place. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Well, let's get back to Katoa.
yeah, sure.
Um, we talked about the main theme beings of light and how it's the texture seems fully orchestral, but you do a really good job like passing things around, so it just kind of gives more of that impression. But one of the things I notice in the subsequent tracks is that the texture does lighten up, and
Hmm.
you know there are probably 1,000 reasons for that. You want to stay out of the way of the gameplay and whatnot. But I'm just curious then how you made those decisions, because there's kind of a lot of piano and
Hmm.
solo instruments, and I really liked the simplicity there. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. We were pretty intentional about dropping it down when you get into the gameplay space, and what we really wanted to do was use music. I mean, this sounds silly because this is what every game does, but I don't think it happens a lot in the mobile space. I think there's a tendency in the mobile space to let's throw together a few loops and sit them
Yeah.
underneath it and call it a day. And we really wanted to try and do what you should do, which is use the score to reflect what's happening in the space. So there's a lot of subtle stuff that's happening. When you first get in there, the world is somewhat polluted, but it's not as polluted as it can get as you're going through gameplay. So there's kind of this introductory space where we're trying to still remain grounded in that main theme,
Mm-hmm.
but distort it in different ways with different textures that come in. You'll hear a lot of kind of, there's still all mostly, I will say mostly, there are some non-acoustic instruments in there,
Yeah.
but a lot of some of the texture comes from taking a lot of those acoustic instruments and like just taking plucks and knocks and things like that and just sequencing them and layering them,
Mm.
and then letting things like reverb and delay kind of give them that texture. The only real non-acoustic instrument, I think, if I remember right, through the whole thing is there's a drone sound that comes that you can hear as your world state transitions into a polluted state. there's a little meter in the lower right hand corner, and as it fills up, there's a drone that shows up, and it's not an acoustic instrument. It's a synthesizer. It's a synthesizer called the Lyra 8, which a really dear friend of mine, Pete Cavidra, loaned me for a period of time. That is like it's like 8 different oscillators on this giant thing, but you play it with there's just contact points on it. Like it's not, you have to kind of really fine tune. You can't, it's impossible to get it in a key. It can't be done. Even though it's got each oscillator has got 2 different pitch controls on it to help you try to get there. It's never going to stay there. But you have this really cool ability to just kind of, as your finger, it's not a theremin is kind of close, but you actually have to make contact. But it's kind of that level of sensitivity as you're moving your finger over these capacitors, these weird sounds start to take shape. And so that is the thing that you start to hear as you're transitioning into that polluted state. And then as you're going through that, when you get into the raid state of the game, you get more of that battle music that really starts to, we call it the Hall of the Mountain King music, that just kind of starts hitting you in the background. And that's where we had the idea to do the rhythm part of it.
Yeah, so like the little battles are there's a little rhythm wheel and you have to tap and the star and all the things. So talk about that.
That is where Steve and Nick and the rest of the crew at Skew's experience was just invaluable. I would have had no idea how to approach that. And
just an aside, Steve Pardo used to work at Harmonix in Boston, which, of course, Harmonix did Guitar Hero. And I mean, they were like the kings and queens of rhythm
know what
gaming.
They're doing.
Yeah. So he has a good perspective when it comes to that.
If you're trying to make a rhythm game, that's probably the dude you want to be talking to.
Yeah.
And so he was just kind of like, well, there's a bunch of different ways that you can structure this. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I think it would be cool if it was different every time. Like it's a rhythm game, but it's not a song-based rhythm game, which is what most rhythm games are.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna play Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, and it's the same every single time I fire up Guitar Hero or Rock Band, and that's what I'm playing. I said, but I would like it to have, it should always be in the same key, but how can we make every encounter different yet the same? And so we worked through that, and what you're hearing when you play that is there's a bunch of different one shots that we created that are different instruments that are layered together. I think there's bassoon and there's cello, like really hard digs on a cello, and some oboe in there, and there might be some contrabassoon in there too. But it's just these layered sounds in a key that are all just dynamically pulled. And then the bed track is written in the same key, but the rhythm varies based on the complexity of the battle that you're going into. So smaller enemies, slower, fewer hits, larger enemies, faster, more hits. And that all kind of pulls, if you've played, it pulls your currency, your spending currency. The better your time is, the cheaper it is to defeat an enemy, and all of that kind of fun stuff. But it was fun. And again, it was one of those deals where it was like, we could get away with just a simple loop here. We don't have to get crazy, but we wanted to see what we could do with it. And Steve and Nick were just awesome in terms of helping us figure out how we're going to do that.
Yeah. So this being, the first game that you did a score for, right? How do you think that has informed you and changed you as a composer from, this point forward? What did it do for you?
I will say that it reignited a deep love for music in general. I think going back to the world of rock and roll and electronic music and pop music, that for me personally, that's always kind of it's had its ups and downs. I'm really into this for this period of time, it's the constant artist struggle. I'm really into this and I'm having a good time, and now nobody likes it. And so now I'm coming down here and I'm going to hang out, and then I'm going to give the old college try and give it another whirl. It really, I mean, it opened my eyes to all of the other ways that you can apply a love for music to things. And it's, I talk to friends who still make wonderful electronic experimental music, and the process is so much shorter. Like the idea that we spent 3 years writing, I think the soundtrack, there's more music in the game that's on the soundtrack. I think the soundtrack clocks in at like 14 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
But the fact that we spent 3 years putting that together and having kind of that level of freedom to just explore and dig in and go down pathways and really get a long way down a particular path before you go, you know what, this isn't the path that we're on. We need to come back and explore a different one. Like that to me, that discovery element is where the best creative juice lives. And so that was the best part about it. And we're doing that again on the next game that I'm working on. That's in a completely different direction sonically, but also still in that discovery phase, which is cool.
Okay. All right. What else are you working on?
The next game that we're working on, so Christian, who is the gameplay director for Katoa, he and I have kicked around this idea for another game that is focused on nature.
Cool.
That all I can say is I will classify it as a meditative deck builder.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
With the score that's being done is very, very, very different than Katoa. It's really looking at like generative ambient electronic stuff. Okay. Kind of, very different than Katoa, but a lot of the ideas were rooted in what we just talked about with the battle music and how that was different every time. What if that's what it is for the whole game all the time, different every time. And so just kind of playing with some stuff in that space. But
awesome. Cool. Yeah. Well, what more do you want to say about Katoa or Stillwater?
Please download it. Please play it.
Yes, I agree.
It really is an awesome game with just a tremendous mission. I'd shout out the fine folks at Snowed In Studios who did all of the development on it. It's just everybody who worked on that game is just, we've talked a lot about how Steve is a tremendous person. Everybody who worked on that game is a tremendous person because everybody's heart is in the same place on it in terms of this means something. We can do this and we can have it mean something. And it's gotten a lot of momentum, and we'd love to just keep it going. So this is my shameless plug.
No shame at all. I've loved the time I spent with it. It's beautiful. The sound is amazing, of course, and the music is great. So it's an easy decision to make, in my opinion. Just download the game, give it a try, and if you continue with it, you're doing some good with your dollars instead of just throwing it at some corporate machine who has 72 other free to plays. But yeah. Well, yeah, it was great chatting, and I look forward to your next game, and I hope we can cross paths before that. There are plenty of opportunities to do so.
You're like 25 minutes from me. So
I know. I should bike out and
come out to the village. Let me know. We'll venture downtown and grab a coffee. And
amazing. I've always wanted to bike out there. I became a biker later in life, not a motorcyclist.
Right.
Let me be clear.
Bicyclist.
Non-motored bicycle.
Although
and I'm not even very good at it. I wreck all the time.
There's kind of that middle ground now, though, right? The big thing is the electric bikes.
And you know what? Those a-holes pass me on hills all the time, and I just want to punch them every single time. I'm like, you cheaters.
There's a coffee shop here in Stillwater that opened right as the pandemic started. And everybody was like, what's going to happen with this coffee shop? And I would shout them out if I could remember the name of it. They pivoted and started renting electric bikes during the pandemic.
Wow.
And it was just like the most insane thing. Like I was down there maybe a year ago, and they were unboxing a whole bunch of new bikes. I said, "What's going on?" He's like, we got to exchange them all. We burnt out all of the first fleet that we had. They're all done. We've got to start over.
Oh my God.
It's a huge deal. Everybody loves an electric bike.
Everybody
loves an electric bike.
Yeah, they do.
And you kind of need one out here if you're going up the hills out here. You kind of
it's hilly by the river for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a little steep.
All right. Well, thanks a million. It was great chatting.
Thank you. This was awesome. This was so much fun.